This meeting, the first devoted to a dimension of a security organization, our security organization, will provide a good opportunity to discuss how can parliamentarians strengthen the effectiveness of the work of the organization in this area. Of course, the difficulties that we have seen recently, in particular, the failure to have the HD meeting after also last year it was not held because of mainly because of the COVID crisis, should provide a good opportunity for us to reflect on where we are, where we're going, what are the issues we find, and how can they be addressed, and what role can parliamentarians do to do that. For this, I would like to invite the President of the Parliamentary Assembly to share with us her own views, and then we will have a very interesting panel from which I expect we will get some good inputs for the subsequent discussion. So President Sederfeld, I would like to give you the floor. It's good to see you. Good afternoon. I don't know if it's only me, I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now, yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador Sangier. Distinguished participants, fellow parliamentarians, dear members of the Secretariats. Let me first welcome all our panelists and participants. Thank you for taking your time to participate in this conversation. I would like to note that this is a very timely discussion. The month of October is strongly associated with the human dimension in the OSCE. Unfortunately, this year again, the human dimension implementation meeting will not take place. I will not go into details or the merits of this. Let me simply observe that this is another worrying symptom. It is part of a long series of events deeply affecting the OSCE's human dimension. But I would also like to mention that ODIHR celebrates its 30th anniversary, and they did so last week. And it was a true pleasure to notice that there were about 300 guests at the event. And from OSCE PA, I took part myself, together with Vice President Irene Chambalidis and Special Representative on Civil Society, Kyriakos Hadianos, both from Cyprus. And of course, our Secretary General, Roberto Montella. And I think this reflects that there is a huge interest among our members as well as others inside OSCE family to highlight and to support and safeguard the human rights. In the past several years and up until very recently, we have seen attempts by participating states to limit OSCE election observation missions. There have been very tense discussions regarding the participation of civil society in OSCE meetings, polarizations, discussions about the work of OSCE institutions like ODIHR in particular continue to delay the timely adoption of the budget year after year, and this affects the work, of course. And last year, lack of consensus led to the unprecedented situation where the OSCE had no executive heads for close to 6 months. There were no Secretary General, no head of ODIHR, no special representative on media, no high representative on ethnic minorities. Today, all positions have a person, but This means, of course, that there is a huge risk that something similar will happen again. And we can't let this be, because human rights is far too important for this. But what's happened when all the 4 positions were empty? It was the inspiration for the call for action. And here we are today with Ambassador Sanier as leading the work forward. And also all our events, and I know that there is a high number of participants. There is quite a lot of discussions, and I hope today will also generate discussions, because as MP, we are elected by our people. It's more than 1 billion people in the OSCE region. And all of them have the right to fundamental human rights, fundamental freedom, political activity, freedom of media, freedom to be respected for the person they are, freedom for meetings. And I could continue this discussion further on, but we have to do something to support the human right in OSCE PA. I am totally aware that in our national parliaments, do we also have a high, a high number of debates and discussions on human rights. And this is important for us, of course, and we should continue to do so. But let's focus. What can we do? How can we assist as parliamentarians, as members of OSCE Parliamentary Assembly? I am today in Athens. Actually, I just arrived 1 hour ago, so it was a little bit busy to connect, but I managed. And I will be participating over here in Athens in a European Conference of Presidents of Parliament. And I will use this opportunity to encourage our parliamentary leaders to give more political importance to the work of our organization and help reinforce the OSCE's human dimension. And I look forward to today's discussions and the ideas that will pop up during this event. And of course, it depends on all our participants. And I will enjoy also to listen to the panelists. Thank you once again, Ambassador Sanier, and I give the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Sederfeld, dear Margareta, and thank you very much also for the effort you made. I know that you're traveling, you're very busy, and we really appreciate even more the fact that you managed to join us for the opening of this important discussion among us, among the parliamentarians. So we will now move to the panel. It's an impressive setup, and let me briefly introduce the panelists to you. Of course, they don't need much introduction. Madame Serene Maborgne, she's the head of the French delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly, but she's the chair also of the General Committee of the Parliamentary Assembly on Democracy, Human Rights, and Humanitarian Question. So it was obvious that she is the person who has perhaps more directly in the Parliamentary Assembly a sense of where things are and how the Parliamentary Assembly can assist, and the parliamentarians can assist in addressing some of the issues, some of the problems that are on the table, including the problems that President Sederfeld just mentioned in relation to elections, budget, etc. We will have then Ambassador Anne Kirsti Carlsen. She is the permanent representative of Norway to the OSCE, so she works on the governmental side, and she's the chair of Human Dimension Committee on that side. So that will be a complementary, in a way, introduction on setting out, in a way, setting the scene for the debates. We have then Ambassador Christian Strohal. He's a former director of ODIHR. He was director between 2003 and 2008. He's also a signatory of the call for action as a former high official in the OSCE. He's also been in touch with former directors, with other former directors of ODIHR. So I'm also looking to him as you know, a high-level, very operational official in this area, and I will be interested in hearing from him also what he thinks from his perspective, the functions that parliamentarians could perform to assist in this field. And I know that he was also recently in Warsaw, so he may wish to share also with us his views on the problems that are on the agenda. Finally, Antonina Maslika, she's a representative of the Civil Solidarity Platform Secretariat and the Netherlands Helsinki Committee. I wanted to have her in this panel because when I was High Commissioner on National Minorities in The Hague, I worked, and I was rather regularly in contact with the Helsinki Committee there. And I found their activities very interesting, very engaging. And this interaction between the governmental side and this civil society platform, I thought was very useful. So the issue of how to also increase the role of the OSCE, to make it more visible, to ensure that the civil society can provide an input and can also support the activities of the organization. I think it's a very important part of our debate. And so it will be, I think, very interesting to see what Antonina will have to say and what her suggestions are on the way forward in terms of contributions by the civil society to the work of our organization, and then looking at how parliamentarians can assist, perhaps by also investing in recreating Helsinki committees within countries wherever they have either ceased to operate or have never existed. So these are the panelists. I would like to begin with Her Excellency Serène Maborde. Madame Maborde, vous avez la parole. Good afternoon.
Ambassador, could we move to the next speaker, please? We're having some problems with Ms. Maborde.
Okay, well, let's move to Ambassador Carlsen then. Ann-Christi, are you there? Can you hear us?
Sure.
I can hear and see you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure. Then you have the floor. Why don't you go ahead?
Thank you so much. And thank you also for giving me this opportunity to talk to you on this topic. We are very happy that you have initiated this process. To be precise, I will not go into all the details on the third dimension, but I will say something about what I think may be possible ways forward at least. International cooperation is easy, of course, when everybody agrees about the direction of the work, but this is not always the case. As we all know, the Helsinki Final Act was a result of a long and complicated process. The geopolitical climate was not very conducive to cooperation back in the 70s either. Yet our states were able to create and agree on this visionary and principally important document. So today, the geopolitical situation and the polarization of political narratives complicate the work of the OSCE, not least in the human dimension, in the third dimension, where we see OSCE commitments being disregarded and neglected by participating states every day. So the issue of HDIM is, of course, a symptom of this, as is also the pressure on our institutions. So how do we create the cooperation climate necessary to agree to recommit to the valuable principles, to rediscover the Helsinki spirit, and perhaps even move the agenda forward? This is indeed important to protect and develop also our institutions and tools, such as ODIHR, election observation methodology, and so further on. So my approach to this can be summed up in 3 main points. First, we need real dialogue on human dimension issues between all actors and participating states. Secondly, we need the OSCE to be visible, not only in Vienna and Copenhagen, but also elsewhere on all issues. And thirdly, there needs to be enough resources, financial, political resources for the organization, including the institutions and field missions. So first, the issue of real dialogue. It is important for states to hold each other account to the commitments in the human dimension. But it is also important to create arenas for confidence building and discussions. When there is a lack of trust between parties and the dialogue has been transformed into parallel monologues, it is not easy to make progress. As chair of the OSCE Human Dimension Committee this year, I have experienced that it is indeed possible to have good, frank, and fruitful discussions on human rights and democracy within the OSCE. It is a precondition, however, that discussions stay topic-based rather than focusing on one particular state or region. Also, dialogue cannot only happen between government representatives. We have managed to involve civil society, academic institutions, parliamentarians, and media representatives in all our meetings, and all parts of our regions have been represented, and this has worked well. A fruitful discussion does not necessarily result in new decisions or commitments, but it may bring us closer to understanding the commitments that we do have. And it enables us to identify areas of common interest. This increases both the trust between us and the confidence in the organization itself. For instance, we have seen throughout the year that the COVID-19 situation has generated an interest to explore how human rights and democracy should be implemented online. All parties seem to be interested in this topic. So parliamentarians and civil society can do a lot more to stimulate and facilitate such discussions. Then to my second point on the visibility of the OSCE, there are many success stories to be told about the OSCE as well. The structures of the OSCE perform important tasks in and for participating states every day. Important issues are discussed in the formal bodies in Vienna and Copenhagen. Participating states hold each other to account about their commitments in several forums every week. But all this is irrelevant if the decision makers have no knowledge of it, if there are no domestic political discussions about our work, if the population is never made aware about the results of the OSCE. The OSCE is of course visible where it is present with field operations or where it has a specific role regarding security issues. But in far too many capitals in OSCE participating states, the OSCE doesn't really reach the political agenda. The delegates of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly have a particular responsibility to make sure that the OSCE is on the agenda of parliaments and that there is political discussion about the work of this organization. Parliamentarians can hold their governments to account, for instance, on how they influence decisions to be made in the OSCE. And you can also encourage use of the large toolbox of the OSCE, which is valuable to all states. So my third point, as you all know, the unified budget has been taken hostage by non-related political disagreement between states. It has had a negative real-term development over the last years, with very visible effects on the reach of the organization's work. OSCE structures lack the resources to fulfill their mandates. On the top of this, tasks and commitments have increased rapidly. We have seen this particularly also with ODIHR and with the pandemic that has made it even more difficult to implement election observation missions, for instance. Their work is really hampered by the lack of budget resources. Governments must show much more flexibility in strengthening the budget. Small increases can really mean a lot in this organization because it is actually quite slim. Parliamentarians can do much more to push their governments in a positive direction through national budget discussions, and I would really encourage that. So to sum up, We will get nowhere in international cooperation without building trust and confidence between parties. This is a precondition for better dialogue about real issues in the human dimension and beyond. At the same time, more awareness of the work of the OSCE is necessary to create more commitments from governments. In the end, I am hopeful that governments will at least see the need to finance the organization properly to realize more of its potential. Human rights are violated every day, democratic institutions are weakened, and the rule of law is challenged. This is exactly why it is important to continue focusing on these issues and to regain momentum for those important commitments. Maybe the 30th anniversary of ODIHR last week could really mark a new start in the discussions about this. So this work is not easy, but then again, we are not here to do easy work, so I can only wish us all the best of luck. Thank you, Ambassador Zannier.
Thanks to you, Ambassador Carlsen. Thank you for your remarks. The idea of a new start following the 30th anniversary is an excellent one. We should maybe consider it as a subtitle, if you want, of this session and of this discussion. But certainly, this should not result in any erosion of the commitments. I think this is one of the things. And you mentioned the budget, and at some point we will have a discussion about budgets in the OSCE as well. I made a point when I was appointed Secretary General. I came from UNMIK, the UN mission in Kosovo, and the budget that I had as head of UNMIK was bigger than the budget of the whole OSCE, with the time 18 field operations, 4 institutions, and the Hofburg and the conference services. So in all this discussion, while I fully understand the points that are made by the various countries, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that overall, the budget is modest for what the organization can provide. So I fully second your point from a personal perspective, the point that you made on resourcing adequately the organization and its institutions. I see that Madame Mauborgne has joined us, she's online, so welcome, bon après-midi, bonjour Madame Mauborgne, vous avez la parole. Je vous ai introduite tout à l'heure. But I cannot hear you.
Oh, you can hear me now?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lamberto. Thank you very much for bringing our focus today to the human dimension. This may prove to be the most difficult and sensitive field that call for action is addressing. I applaud this ambition. Of course, the human dimension is central in the OSCE. It's fundamental pillar of our work, dating back to the 70s. We know that agreeing on human rights commitments at that time was not easy, but they were agreed. We should take inspiration from this. It was possible in the past, and so it must be possible again to get agreement on enhancing human rights protection. However, the OSCE clearly has some structural challenges. I know that there has been discussion about the consensus rule in other sessions, but it's particularly relevant in human dimension work. It's the reason why we have not had a human dimension implementation meeting this year. This fact alone should be treated as a real crisis for human rights in OSCE. Peer-to-peer review has been central to the OSCE's human rights work. But if one country can block with impunity the main forum for this peer-to-peer review, we are not in a normal situation. The secrecy surrounding the blockage of HDEM and other uses of the veto is particularly troubling. Governments should be held publicly accountable for such decisions. Breaking consensus should be a public action that the government needs to justify. In this new situation, without an HDM for 2 years, there is much discussion about how the OSCE can compensate. Some think that more expensive use of the Moscow mechanism may help. This is a very targeted tool in which experts are used to investigate a specific issue. It's true that the progress can sort of function without cooperation of the host government, meaning that work can take place without consensus. But I have trouble seeing this as a broad replacement of the public human rights reviews. The OSCE has previously raised the idea of replacing HDM with a constant, year-round basis. Effectively, the idea is to open up the Permanent Council to the public every second week with a focus on human rights. Unfortunately, this would probably require consensus. There may also be opportunities to search for some new option internally within the OSCE. For example, the ODIHR conducts reviews of draft legislation for compliance with human rights standards and monitors politically sensitive court trials. However, in the most cases, ODIHRs need to be asked by the government to do so. If the ODIHR could accept requests for such work from other bodies, such as the Parliamentary Assembly or field missions or of other governments, additional opportunities for accountability might develop. The OSCE EPA, of course, has much greater flexibility. We have open and public discussion and critical resolution are adopted. I don't think that anybody wants the Parliamentary Assembly to take over the role of review and accountability in the OSCE. However, accountability comes naturally to parliamentarians. Perhaps greater interaction and cooperation with parliamentary human rights committees could unlock some opportunities. There may also be value in seeking partnerships at other levels of governments. Municipalities and cities are paying increasing attention to human rights and may be natural partners in both accountability and implementation. At a time when the OSCE is becoming increasingly closed to interaction with NGOs, parliaments may also be able to help. As parliamentarians, we regularly seek advice, the civil society experts and independent voices in all sorts of fields. Combining these openness with modern tools of communication may open up new possibilities for public accountability of governments. The inconvenient truth is that in many countries now, being a human rights defender is equated as being in opposition to authorities. This is a demonstration of how serious the problem are in some places. Unfortunately, I don't think that we are going to solve all issues in the human dimensions today, but I'm happy we are having this focus today. We must remember that failing in the human dimension have real consequences for our population on a daily basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Seren, for your contribution and for the many interesting suggestions that you have put forward. You also mentioned the issue of consensus, which we in fact discussed in the past. And this idea of accountability was gaining a lot of support. So perhaps this is also one area where the Parliamentary Assembly might consider some resolutions recommending that kind of strengthening, if you want, of controls over the use of or the abuse of the consensus rule in the organization. So that's a thought that maybe could stay with us, and when the opportunities come, this might become an initiative by the Parliamentary Assembly or by interested delegations within the Parliamentary Assembly. So now we move to Ambassador Stroval. Christian, good to see you. Thank you for your support also in organizing this meeting, and I'm looking forward to your own view of the situation. You have the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lamberto, and thank you to the PA for having this discussion and for having this discussion in this broader process. And I think, as it has already become clear in the debate so far, in a way, the overriding question which we are asking ourselves, or which you are asking us, is the human dimension in crisis. And the short answer to this is yes, of course. It has always been, and it will always be, because human rights are always in danger, it has been said. Governments don't like to be criticized, and institutional implementation control is therefore also criticized or questioned. So maybe the more, let's say, the more succinct or the more focused question is what has changed more recently. And I think you put this very succinctly in your background paper. But maybe first you concentrated on the organization. I think maybe first also very quickly the broader picture. The broader picture is, I think, quite obvious that over the last few years there were developments which were not conducive to strengthening the protection of human rights, populist and autocratic tendencies in a number of governments, weaknesses in addressing new challenges in rights, the diminishing trust and cohesion sometimes within societies, or one could say growing polarization. And of course, as you also mentioned, diminishing trust and polarization among governments and in governmental discourse, and therefore consequently the danger of institutional weakening. And all this in addition to everything which happens in the world, violent conflicts, extremism, organized crime, etc., and of course the most recent question of how to face the pandemic with a human rights oriented approach. So these eroding processes, and this is my second point, as you have put in your paper, have also affected our organizations. Not only the debates within the Permanent Council, which are more polarized maybe than previously, also the difficulties of finding consensus, including on senior appointments, budgets, and mandated meetings, and also maybe a risk of not fully engaging with all the mechanisms and opportunities this organization is offering to all participating states. And the failure to agree on an H-team has brought this all in a way to the forefront. I think it's in all these regards a major setback for the organization, sort of in terms of mandated meetings and not doing it, because one government essentially opposed to it, but also more generally, the fact that governments with not having the H-team are failing to fulfill their own mandate to examine their record. that sort of peer-to-peer review, which has been mentioned repeatedly, does not take place in that sort of public format, which is provided by the HDIM. And of course, as we were just reminded by Madame Mauborn, the Permanent Council is close to the public. It's also close to the qualified public. And this brings me to your other point, which you have highlighted in your paper, and that is the engagement or lack of engagement with civil society. And I would put this in a larger picture, because what happens at the HDIM, of course, is not only peer-to-peer and governments with civil society, but it's also everybody with the whole organization, with the institutions, the field missions, with other international organizations, with experts, all of this sort of informed debate, for which a number of people have usually been preparing for weeks in advance, did not take place. So it's a denial of dialogue with partners in a way, which we have been seeing, a denial of sort of self-engagement, let alone engaging with others. And this, of course, has also repercussions on the substantial side, because out of these annual meetings, a lot of additional proposals, ideas have been emerging, which subsequently found their way into the work of the organization, and in particular in its activities in the field. So in that situation, and that is maybe my third and last sort of point in view of conclusion, what we are seeing and what we have been already starting to discuss is a lack of sufficient political leadership. So where is it that the Parliamentary Assembly can bring in more political leadership? A number of very interesting suggestions have been made today and also in previous discussions. So maybe what we could look at now is the question, is it time to move on to the next phase of this Helsinki Plus 50 process, to develop a joint and sustained dialogue effort by the Parliamentary Assembly, together with the institutions and field missions, and together with civil society, on how to address not only these challenges, but starting maybe to look at expectations and experiences, including youth organizations, and of course, including the operational partners of the organization. So starting with substantive challenges, looking at the current processes, what are the strengths and weaknesses, how can we strengthen a systematic follow-up to those processes and the activities. Election observation missions have been mentioned, legislative review has been mentioned, trial monitoring has been mentioned, but there is of course a lot of more issues which are happening, but where the follow-up may be more of an ad hoc nature than of a systematic one. Another point would be to how to further develop accountability tools. At the moment, the abuse which we have been seeing of the consensus principle comes without public accountability. That I would very much agree with Madame Mauborn. This should be an issue of the past. We need to find ways to make this bring this out into the open. A final point would be maybe to open a register of best practice, or what Ambassador Carlson said or labeled as success stories. There are many success stories, maybe not in the Hofburg, but everywhere else where this organization is active on the ground. And they are not being brought back into a systematic manner. And the last point, of course, would be the peer-to-peer review, as it is not taking place in the way. It should be, it needs a hard look at how this can be made effective. One can look at what is happening elsewhere, the UPR process in the UN Human Rights Council. I remember, because I was there when it was invented, people said this will be the end of everything. Of course, it was not. It was an additional instrument of systematically looking at every single country's performance over several years. Maybe we can take an inspiration from that and develop it further, not just replicate it. And in a way, if we have such a process of sort of looking at this all in a way of leading up to Helsinki plus 50, that process should also be accompanied by joint reports to the ministerial councils, so that ministers have an idea on the wider picture in this organization, not only the intergovernmental one, and to be able to discuss also and maybe to take the decisions necessary, which would allow us to be 50 years after the Helsinki Final Act, the avant-garde which we once have been. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Christian, for this very rich presentation of yours. Out of the many points you raised, I would highlight the call you made for more political leadership. This is at the center of it all, the way I see it. And you also highlighted the nature of this process. As we mentioned Helsinki plus 50, we shouldn't fall into the trap of telling ourselves, well, let's take our time and then in 2025 we'll come up with some recommendations. In fact, we need to identify issues, see how the Parliamentary Assembly can contribute to addressing them. Your idea of starting discussing in detail some of these issues, having a debate in the Parliamentary Assembly, and having perhaps the President of the Parliamentary Assembly at the ministerial meetings of the OSCE include in her own presentation also some of the recommendations that come out of this call for action Helsinki plus 50 process, I think is an excellent idea. So that's something that we should discuss also in the Bureau and the other competent fora of the Parliamentary Assembly to make sure that this process produces results on the way to Helsinki plus 50, and possibly by Helsinki plus 50 contributes also to providing, how can I say, a new vision or an updated vision for the whole organization for the way forward. Let's now move to the last speaker, Antonina Maslika. I was very keen to have a voice from the civil society also because of my own, as I mentioned earlier, my own very positive experience with the Helsinki Committee of the Netherlands. So Antonina, it's great to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your views on the role of the civil society, the frustrations of the civil society, the contributions the civil society can provide, your own experiences. That's all very welcome. So good to see you, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Dania, for inviting us, the Netherlands Helsinki Committee, to participate in this important event about the discussion on the human dimension and, of course, the issues of how to improve that. Speaking about the organization that I currently represent in this meeting, the Netherlands Helsinki Committee, this is an NGO that is based in the Netherlands, and it was founded in 1987, and then we represented the Dutch civil society in the Helsinki process, following the examples of sister Helsinki committees from across the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe area. Throughout our work, we contribute to wider international agendas, including, of course, the human dimension aspect of the OSCE, but then, of course, other international commitments of states with different international frameworks, including obligations under the UN treaties and, of course, within the UN's Sustainable Development Goals framework. And today we are one of those non-governmental organizations that actively contribute to the dialogue and cooperation among actors in the areas of rule of law and human rights. Our work is primarily aimed at contributing to a world in which citizens across the OSCE area can peacefully live in more open and just society. And in that regard, in dialogue in both, we are in close contact to our work within the foreign affairs and the OSCE.
Antonina,
we, of course,
the quality is not very good. Can you maybe turn off the video to see whether we can get a better quality sound?
How about now? Ambassador Zania, I don't hear you because your mic is muted. So
sorry. We don't hear you particularly well. Try another moment, and then otherwise we would have to return to you and see if we can address the technical issues.
Sure. Does it sound better now?
Yeah, it does. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. I will then reiterate once again that we indeed aim in our work at contributing to a world in which citizens of the OSCE area peacefully live in a more open and just society. And in our work, we try to engage in the dialogue both at national and international levels. And when it comes to the national level, we are in close cooperation with the members of the Dutch Parliament of its both chambers, first chamber and the second chamber, within the framework of the committees on foreign affairs, and of course within the framework of the committees that work specifically with the OSCE and issues, of course, covered by other international organizations, including Council of Europe, for example. When it comes to specific framework of the OSCE, I would also like to mention that the sister committee, Helsinki committee, is based in various countries of the OSCE region, work together informally, but also engage in the work of a network that is currently run by us at the Secretariat, and this network is called Civic Solidarity Platform, which primarily focuses on the human dimension commitments made by the participating states of the OSCE. For more than 4 decades, civil society has played a crucial role in the OSCE work, including in such areas of human dimension as fundamental freedoms, rule of law, torture prevention, gender equality, access to justice, democratic institutions, and election observation. And we, of course, are happy to provide any suggestions or recommendations that involve strengthening OSCE instruments and processes. However, in recent years, we have been witnessing that NGO participation in these processes in cooperation with the OSCE institutions and participating states has become an issue of a heated debate when the space for civil society participation in the OSCE related activities have been shrinking quite profusely. We believe that the OSCE has a responsibility to stand up for civil society organizations, especially those that are repressed at their home countries, and to provide a platform for them to voice their positions and bring their information, which is all the more important since they lack direct channel of communications with the governments. And in this regard, we do appreciate the efforts that have been made within the framework of the Parliamentary Assembly, specifically with the establishment of the position of the special representative of the PA on engagement with civil society. We have been in close cooperation with Mr. Hajiani, and have been also in close cooperation with Ms. Kauma, with whom we were able to organize a roundtable discussion on protecting and enhancing civil society space in the Osce region back in 2020, before the COVID lockdowns were introduced. And we are, of course, also deeply alarmed by the failure to hold an HDM for the 2 years in a row currently, because we unfortunately can state that this deprives the states and, of course, the citizens in the OSCE region of a key mechanism for reviewing the state of the human dimension, which is indispensable and inseparable element of the OSCE concept of comprehensive security. And we very much appreciate the proposals that have been already made by all distinguished speakers of this panel. And we strongly support the idea of joint and sustained dialogue effort to come up with the solutions for addressing this impasse in which we are now finding themselves, and believe that holding a systemic debate and addressing these persistent and new challenges, taking into account the ongoing discussions and resulting that should result in the elaboration of forward-looking substantive proposals regarding the road ahead of the 3 Helsinki dimensions is crucial. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonina, for sharing with us your experience, your thoughts, but also your suggestions. And I think this idea of a sustained dialogue seems to be gaining speed. So that's something that we will have also to discuss with Seren Mabor, because this is also something that would involve the Human Dimension Committee of the Parliamentary Assembly. So we can consider what could be the way forward. But of course, I don't also want to turn this process into, how can I say, a debate on the human dimension only, because there are, how can I say, areas of difficulties in other sectors of the work of the organization. So we need also to keep the larger picture in mind while finding a way to address, from a political perspective, from the perspective of the role of the parliamentarians, both individually and together as Parliamentary Assembly, identify the issues and finding, how can I say, the space for proposals that can be also put forward on behalf of the Parliamentary Assembly to the intergovernmental side, and help strengthen the institution and make the work of the organization more efficient, more effective. So this from my part. You heard lots of ideas, of suggestions, of considerations of various kinds. I would like to open the floor for discussion, and I would like also to encourage the panelists to feel free also to comment on each other's contributions, of course. So this from my side, and I don't have any requests on the floor. I think it is.
I have raised my hand.
Oh, I didn't see you. Sorry, Margarita. Yes, please, of course.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think it has been a very fruitful and interesting discussion here today. I have listened, and if I should just say a few words, I totally agree that call for action is much broader than human rights. It's involved the whole work of the OSCE, inclusive the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. And when I think about call for action, I see it as a response to what I very often hear, OSCE doesn't work any longer. That's what I hear when I am out meeting with different persons and organizations. And for me, it's not enough to just say laconic that OSCE doesn't work. What can we do to improve the organization? OSCE have a mandate, and I think the work we do is very important, and we need to, after all these webinars, maybe there will be some put together, as I know that Lamberto and Sanier have done all the time, put together some notes, concept notes after the webinars, and maybe there could be some outcome of this that we could go further on with. And absolute, I will look forward to bring the outcome of this discussion with me when I meet with other locators in my capacity as president, because we need to take an initiative from the OSCE PA, as nobody else have taken such an initiative. And if we should make the organization as a whole to work more proper, we have to, what should I say, to do what we do here, discuss, find different, both problem, but also ideas for solution and steps forward. It's not an easy task, but I think that just that we have started the process in OSCE PA might also have a spillover effect on others who start to think in a way of reshaping, rechanging, development, find new ways forward. Because, as I said in the beginning, and what have been said here from several of the participants, human rights is fundamental. They are important, and so is also all the other issues inside OSCE. And if OSCE should be working in a more proper way, we have to adjust to this. And I can just mention that when there is the winter the meeting for the the Ministerial Council in December, we always in OSCE PA hold a bureau meeting before the Ministerial Council. We will do so this time as well. And I have invited, together with the vice presidents of OSCE PA, Ambassador Sanier, for a discussion about where are we today and how to go forward. And I think that's another step that we need to take to go forward. And of course, to involve, next step will be to involve the Bureau and the Standing Committee, because the discussion is also a step forward, as it's a wake-up signal, but we need to act. Call for action is not only a discussion, it's also action, as the name says. I will stop here. Thank you.
Exactly, Margareta. I couldn't agree more. And I would be really pleased to see action resulting from all of our meetings and from this process. And thank you for your words. And then looking forward to this discussion in Stockholm as well. Now I would like to give the floor to Josef Tittli, the head of the Swiss delegation.
Thank you, Ambassador Sanier. Dear Margareta, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, first of all, for all the presentations, for the interesting presentations we had during the panel. Thank you also, Margareta, for your very interesting remarks. I completely agree with you. The Swiss delegation attaches great importance to the human dimension, which is an essential pillar of the OSCE comprehensive approach to security. Participating states need to respect their commitments. Strong OSCE institutions are key in this regard, and Switzerland will continue to help the OSCE to ensure that human rights remain a central part of conflict prevention and conflict resolution. In 1992 in Helsinki, our heads of states gave a clear mandate to hold a human dimension implementation meeting every year. Last year, participating states made the decision not to hold this annual meeting due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This year, and more regrettably, the Human Dimension Implementation Annual Meeting will not take place this time because no consensus could be found regarding the modalities of the conference. As we all know, the OSCE works by consensus. Consensus requires that all participating states demonstrate political will and the readiness to compromise. If these elements are lacking, the OSCE cannot function. Such repetitive incidents are most regrettable, especially if we think to the high number of achievements that we accomplished since 1975. This year, we celebrate the 30th anniversary of ODIHR. For 3 decades, ODIHR has played a central role in promoting democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in the OSCE region. The hundreds of election observation missions deployed everywhere between Vancouver and Vladivostok show the unique role of the OSCE. Thanks to the ODIHR and also to our assembly, we are in the position to guarantee professional, independent, and credible election observation, what is fundamental for both safeguarding and strengthening democracy in the OSCE region. We, members of parliament, are committed by our constitutions to exercise a control of the governmental activities. We are in a very good position to convince our own government to follow up the recommendations adopted by OSCE, especially in the very sensible fields of the human dimension. With the framework of this oversight mission, there are OSCE instruments that not only help us, but also builds bridges between the different dimensions of security. With regard to the security sector, I can mention the Code of Conduct on politico-military aspects of security adopted in 1994. In the spirit of our call for action, I therefore propose that our Parliamentary Assembly take a closer look at the established instruments that concretely empower us as parliamentarians to act in favor of strengthening the institution and legitimacy of the OSCE. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Mr. Ditley. We're taking note of your suggestions, and certainly focusing also on the instruments of the organization would be a good step, I think. Also considering the constant rotation of the parliamentarians, also to keep them informed and updated on the key tools of the organization. I think it would be probably something positive to consider, maybe in parallel to the call for action process. The next speaker is former president of the Parliamentary Assembly, Mr. Adrian Severin. You have the floor, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Zanier. Well, I will try to bring in to this debate some ideas as a former president of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, but also from the perspective of my experience as a special rapporteur of the United Nations Council on Human Rights, which allow me to learn a lot about the views on human rights existing in other countries than the European ones. I remember then when I presented to the United Nations Council on Human Rights my report on the human rights situation in Belarus, I was accused for Eurocentrism by great democracies in other continents like India, for instance. And I realized that indeed, perhaps we have to be much more nuanced when we believe that in the world and maybe within the group of the member states of the OSCE, we are really dealing with one single set of human rights or one single vision on human rights. So if we need to dialogue, we need dialogue for sure, because we have different approaches, different understandings. And since each of us believes that he or she is right, I think that we have also to accept the other's right to be wrong. if we do not accept the other's right to be wrong, I am afraid that we are going towards what has been said before, a series of parallel monologues instead of a dialogue. And these parallel monologues is a source of mistrust. And I fully agree with what has been already said, that the trust is a huge problem. And if we have to admit that human rights as concept and human rights as a process and human rights as the OEC dimension are in crisis, this is, among others, because there is a very little trust amongst the member states. So therefore, I think that number one, we should ask ourselves why the trust is missing. And secondly, what could be done in order to overcome this problem? Before overcoming this problem, I don't think that we can get rid of the, what I would call, generally speaking, the human rights crisis. We have to remember again and again that this is a security organization, that this organization has been created in order to consolidate and security in the continent and make security feasible and sustainable. And indeed, somebody mentioned that when CSCE was born, when Helsinki Act has been adopted, we had a more divided continent in terms of the approach or understanding of the human rights, and certainly in terms of political organizations. And even during those very difficult times, we were able to hold a dialogue. It was not easy, of course, it was very difficult, but in any case, it was more vibrant, more robust, I would say, more constructive, more positive, the dialogue than it is today. And we have to understand, to ask ourselves and to understand, why was it more feasible to have a dialogue in the 1970s when we had a Cold War and we had two blocks with completely different political regimes, and why is it more difficult and why are we in a stalemate today? And this leads me to think about the concept of commitment. Yes, what do we mean by commitment? Or in other words, what is the object of the commitment? Some of us, many of us, I myself, I was happy years ago to believe that the commitment was for every country to implement, to adopt, recognize, respect, and implement the same values, the same human rights. Today, I would reconsider that definition of the object of commitments. And I would say our commitment is to work together in order to move on convergent lines towards a common goal of reaching common or compatible, at least, understandings on the human rights. So if it's not about doing this everything now, but it's about working together in order to reach a system of human rights which is compatible, even if the political regimes here and there are different, then I think that we could build a more positive dialogue and to have a better perspective for the future. And I think that this debate should start or should take place at least in the OEC Parliamentary Assembly, because otherwise, if we simply say, well, there is a commitment, you have breached the commitment, here are the sanctions, you have to be accountable, then we get what we've got already. We got a refusal of dialogue, we got a lack of consensus in terms of decisions, and we are practically nowhere, and we cannot use the human rights dimension as a tool for consolidating our common security. I would add a second point to that. I think Mr. Strohal made an excellent proposal concerning a register of good practices. So perhaps it would be a good step forward to describe and point out the good practices rather to blame the bad practices. If by describing the good practices, we could inspire the countries who are not following those practices to adopt them, I think that we might make the progress. If we are simply criticizing the others, I'm afraid that we are going to go nowhere. My last point, another suggestion. I have seen during the last months huge demonstrations in almost all important towns in Europe against the limitation of human rights, breaches of human rights, which are excused or explained by the need to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. There are protests everywhere. There are people thinking that the measures against the pandemic are going too far in terms of ignoring the liberties and the rights and so on. While I didn't see the parliamentarians addressing this issue. I believe that maybe while at the national levels it would be difficult, at the level of the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, one could revisit the huge problem of human rights versus security. In this case, it's about health security, it's about health care. I think that this might be an interesting topic which could inspire also a better approach on the general issue of human rights. So I would stop here, but I think that we have to address the unpleasant truths, and the most unpleasant truth is that the dialogue is missing, the trust is missing, and we have to ask ourselves, what could we do in order to rebuild trust and to restart the dialogue? Otherwise, one might be very, let's say, happy that we have our own convictions concerning the human rights, and this is an important dimension, but the practical results are going to be very mince. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Severin, for I think you've taken, how can I say, a step back to look at the larger picture. That's particularly useful. I remember when I started as Secretary General, and I felt that the dialogue in the organization at that point, this was 10 years ago, was really not functioning anymore. I invented something which I called the security days. And the first of these security days was about rebuilding trust in the OSCE area. This was 2012, 2 years before the beginning of the crisis in and around Ukraine. And the conclusion of that discussion was that there was a serious lack of trust in the organization already. But once there was a realization of that, nobody really engaged, try to address the causes of it. And this could be one of the things we may have to go back to, looking at what went wrong over this last 30 years, now that we are celebrating the 30th anniversary, but in this situation that is not, how can I say, ideal. If the H team cannot meet, then something has gone wrong somewhere. So we need, and also the fact that there is no trust, I think one needs to go back and look at the causes of this. So this needs a lot of work. But of course, and I agree with you when you say it's not a matter of making sure that everybody carries out the same or implements the same commitments, obligations, the same manner. What matters, everything in the OSCE, after all, is work in progress. But what really matters is the direction. So we want to see progress in this, and maybe the idea of the best practice is a good one. Something the Parliamentary Assembly could do is to look for someone who could volunteer to start collecting best practices. This is, again, put us in the realm of the work of the Human Dimension Committee, but there could be a rapporteur or someone who looks around and starts collecting and shows, progress is being made. This demonstrates this in different ways, but it works, and this can provide a basis for initiatives, for discussion, for debates in a way that can help identify problems. So anybody else feels provoked by this discussion and wants to intervene at this point? I don't see anybody. Let me just, while you're thinking about it, let me say a couple of words also about the pandemic and the demonstrations, because of course, also in my own country, in Italy, we've seen plenty of them. And the debate is about, individual rights. Is that an absolute notion? Or is there a limit to individual right in what is the collective right? One of the political leaders in Italy at some point said, yeah, there is a right of people to decide whether or not they want to be vaccinated, but there are also rights by others not to be put in danger by the lack of vaccination of those who resisted. So there is always an element of balance. An individual right finds a limit always in somebody else's right, which might be different. And so this compromise has to be kept in mind. I see that Audrey Glover is submitting some ideas. Right. Discussion on the implementation of final report of election observation missions by the Permanent Council. Of course, there are issues about methodology as well. I understand that there are debates on these questions. So will this help addressing also those problems? Audrey, would you like to intervene on this point yourself?
Just to say that it is rather disappointing that the same recommendations appear in election observation reports year after year, and yet really nobody seems to worry or mind about that. And perhaps if there could be a slightly in more depth discussion about this in the Permanent Council by the participating states, I think that might be a step in the right direction, because obviously the recommendations are usually to try and prevent there being any conflict between the different candidates and trying to hide and prevent voters from voting, etc., all very basic human rights. And so perhaps that might be a way of just starting discussion to get people, getting used to discussing these issues more. But discussion obviously is very necessary because there's been a lot of talk and we need a bit of action now, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey, for this additional clarification. If anybody wants to react or to, because of course the Parliamentary Assembly can encourage Permanent Council to do that, but of course we'll have to see, and we enter in a consensus-based environment as well. So this would have to take, if we go forward with recommendations in that direction, that should, how can I say, not single out anybody in particular, but really apply across the board to everybody, becoming a kind of a accepted practice, involving everybody at every kind of election. But this also means that election observation should become, how can I say, systematic across the OSCE area. Right. Anybody else on any other points? I would like to encourage you also to provide us material. You heard the President Sederfeld encouraging us to come up with a report with the key suggestions that may, provide a basis for further discussions on the one hand, but also a basis for a possible, how can I say, overall action of the by the Parliamentary Assembly in addressing these things and in assisting the organization addressing these problems. So the more food you help me put on the plate, the better from my perspective. Well, I understand there are a number of difficult, sensitive issues on the table. There are a number of very interesting proposals. So from my perspective, if there is no appetite to intervene further, I will try to operationalize as much as possible these suggestions and to present possible proposals. But I see Christian Stroll wants to intervene to comment. Christian, get the floor.
Well, maybe just a short comment on your point, which I think is key on saying we want to see progress. So the question is what defines progress and who defines progress? And I think what progress means in terms of this organization is, first of all, we need more engagement. We need more engagement with this organization in all dimensions, not only in the human dimension, but because they are increasingly interrelated. It's obvious that not only does what happens in the other dimensions affect the human dimension, but also that what happens or does not happen in the human dimension affect or negatively affects the work in other dimensions. More engagement also means more visibility and more publicity. And that is, again, something I think where parliamentarians and the Parliamentary Assembly, but also individual parliamentarians, can much more easily play a role than the diplomatic part or even the institutional part of this organization. Progress also means we need more feedback, more reality check in a way. We need to know what is happening on the ground, what are the concerns and the realities on the ground. And for that, there's so many other things, civil society and continuing dialogue with civil society is of course essential. And I think it's clear that it is nice to have civil society every 3-4 weeks in a human dimension committee in Vienna, but that does not in any way replace an ongoing dialogue with civil society on the issues. The same goes for follow-up. You mentioned EOMs and the question, how do we make sure that Audrey's point about the same recommendations coming up and again can be overcome. I think a sort of systematic follow-up discussion with the country on final reports and with the parliamentarians would certainly be one element for that. And we need more accountability. I think that is also progress. I think the fact that things can be said or done or not said or not done in the Permanent Council with complete impunity is not healthy for any organization, and certainly not if you look at other international organizations and how that issue is handled there. And maybe a sort of more operational point in terms of progress, we did have in the past occasionally bigger reports, either from the institutions of one of the institutions or from a panel of eminent persons, or encouragements from the Parliamentary Assembly to develop action plans, for example. There is not much appetite for action plans at the moment, I think, but maybe that is also something to be examined. Why is this so? Where are issues where a sort of organization-wide plan would help us not only to focus on a particular issue, but also help on the overall concern of stronger political leadership, because it would then be also more measurable in terms of, are we succeeding to what we have been prescribing ourselves? Are we not? Where are the obstacles? Where are the successes? Only a register of sort of feel-good kind of success stories is tempting, but that's not the whole picture. Of course, it would be a register of where have we overcome a deficit, a shortcoming, and why? And how did we do it? And would that be an example for others? But in all of this, I think more than sort of ad hoc voluntary activity, more systematic approach in the Permanent Council, beyond the Permanent Council, and in the interaction with everybody else, particularly with the PA and its members, I think is a key element if we can look for progress.
Thank you, Christian. I think I've seen Adrian Severin wanted to make another comment. No, sorry. Anybody else?
I didn't want to come in, but if you asked, if you mentioned my name, I simply want to react to what you said about individual rights versus so-called collective right. Rights. Well, this is indeed an issue which I'm not going to deny that this is indeed a very important aspect of the whole discussion around the human rights. And certainly somebody should address that. My feeling is that the national parliaments didn't, because they were very much involved in finding fast solutions to the pandemic, they didn't have time to address these issues, the balance between the individual rights, civil rights, and on one hand, and the rights of the population, of the groups, to defend their values, amongst these values, the life and the health being one important. So therefore, I think that it would be worthwhile. I'm not going to place myself on one side or on the other side at this point, but I think that the issue should be discussed. Moreover, it is important to be discussed because outside of the pandemic crisis, we very often heard from the states who are supposed to be very casual about the respect of human rights, that, well, what do you want from us? Yes, we are breaching some human rights here and there, but this is because of the need of the nation to be protected, and the general interest should have some kind of priority vis-a-vis the individual rights of the citizens. So therefore, I think that by addressing the present issue, the balance of individual versus so-called collective, you call them collective rights, and I will keep this concept. So if we address this problem, or this topic of the equilibrium between the two within the context of the pandemic, maybe we could open, a door towards the broader discussion on this equilibrium when the argument is brought by countries which from our, or some of us point of view, are not sticking with their commitments in terms of the respect for human rights. So as I said, I didn't want to come back into the debate, but since you called me, and since I saw that there is not a long list of people asking for the floor, I wanted just to elaborate a little bit on what you said. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks to you for this, I think, useful comment on yours. But in the meantime, I see that Mr. Kyriakos Sadiani from Cyprus wants to intervene. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and very short. Don't take a lot of your time because it's also too late. But I want to stress again the importance of the integration of civil society into the meetings and also in the assemblies of the OSCEs by all levels, by all bodies, and an additional and substantial added value that they give this participation. They give a substantial added value to the organization because the supervision of the role of law increases. Additionally, reduce this integration, the distance between the citizens and politics, or even the decision-making system. They were societies, today we have societies and are made up of citizens with very, very large and different knowledge, shortens the distance between the perception. This is what I mean. I want to stress that we have all this perception put next to each other and not far from each other, so we can achieve actually a substantial and decisive step in direction of peace. And I want to stress again the situation from today, the sensibility of today, about the human rights defenders. We are everywhere, all NGOs, they are, please us, do something. It is, the situation is very bad, and prepare with the past that the human rights defenders in almost all countries, we have problems. And because of prisoners without trials, NGOs, leaders with many problems, and many problems with police. Everything is in a climatic without, it is not in a rule of law. So for this reason, we have to stress again and to see and to find solution how will be possible to include the civil society in our meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Radiani. I think it's good that you put or draw more attention to the issue of the civil society, which we, I think, haven't discussed enough. This is something that has come up in a number of meetings in the call for action process. And it seems to me that parliamentarians could play a useful role in promoting an engagement of civil society on OSCE issues. One way of doing that is to themselves promote the creation, if not of Helsinki committees, but at least of organizations, or engage with organizations that already are channeling, if you want, representation of the civil society, and making sure that issues on the agenda of the OSCE are put to the attention of the civil society. This will benefit the profile of the organization. So in fact, it was in the context of discussion on profile that we in the past discussed the role of civil society, because it has to be brought more to the public. The OSCE shouldn't be, it's an organization that shouldn't be, or whose agenda should not be limited to discussions between closed doors in the permanent council, this kind of thing. It should really be brought out to the people, and people should have a possibility to give their feedback. Also, when it comes to the commitments, and not only the human dimension, in every area of attention of the organization. And this can be done at various levels, can be done nationally. So it's a matter, you know, also parliamentarians themselves individually can benefit from the feedback from the civil society, and maybe realize that things are not seen the same way they might perceive them themselves. And this might help them, you know, adjust their own policies as parliamentarians, their own positions. And then, of course, the more difficult issue of how this can be reflected in collective fora. What has gone wrong, if anything? Is this a significant problem when it comes to the H team, for instance, and in other areas? In the permanent council, there is a habit of bringing groups of students or interested people in observing meetings of the permanent council. That could be a model of something that could lead to an opening to the public of discussions also in the permanent council. So perhaps that could inspire initiatives by the Parliamentary Assembly to encourage more openness in at least some parts of discussion of the Permanent Council. Others might also be more sensitive. So, of course, that requires analysis for further discussions. But certainly, as parliamentarians, I think there is potential, there is space for more initiatives to strengthen the role that civil society can have within the organizations, with the parliaments and the in the institutional meetings of the OSCE. All these points we'll try to reflect also in our in the paper that we will issue following this. At this point, this paper cannot be much more than a compilation of points, but it can be also a starting point for further reflection on the next steps. And maybe so the next how can I say concept paper for any follow-up meeting in this can be more operational, and hopefully will lead also to initiatives in the context of the institutional forum of the Parliamentary Assembly itself. Okay, this is it from my side. Anybody else? Mr. Hadiani, did you want to comment? I thought I saw.
I agree with your remarks. Of course, we also have problems how we can approach our possibilities to strengthen the role of civil society, either in favor of the civil society or also in favor of the role of the OSCE, and especially with Parliamentary Assembly. But from the other side also, I see a lot of huge work is coming from ODIHR. And this instrument, let me say this. This instrument is an opportunity for us, and also mean to improve the possibility to approach the civil societies or the NGOs in favor of bringing them the Helsinki principles and values. And from the other side, as I told before by my short speech, to include the society, to include the people, to include the sense of the people in a common aim. I don't want to say that we have to avoid the criticism or the other opinion or the other perception. No, it's not the meaning. But I mean, we don't want to have big distances between the perceptions so that this distance allow not so easy to create conditions for dialogue, either internally in one state or internationally or regionally. Thank you very much.
To you. Good. Any other requests at this point? Let me make, as we draw closer to the conclusion, let me make also another point, referring back to both something Christian Stroll said at the beginning, at the point by President Sederfeld, that has to do with the perception of the organization and the crisis, in a way, of the organization as such. And as Christian was saying, regardless of difficulties in having, which we shouldn't play down, of course, but the difficulty in having one or another meeting or at making these discussions in consultative fora as effective as they should be. The fact remains that the organization keeps providing a very solid contribution on the ground through the institutions. I saw that when I was High Commissioner National Minorities, and I realized that all the extent, and it was pretty broad extent of my activities, there was little understanding of how much was done on the ground and what the impact on the ground of what we were doing was, in fact. So I think one should not underestimate what the OSCE means for the people that benefit from the activities of the OSCE. This is a point that Secretary General Montella makes often himself, having himself in previous functions served on the ground. Actually, Secretary General Montella asked me to excuse him for not being able to be present today, but he remains, how can I say, strongly committed and very strongly supportive of this call for action process. So the issue is, while the organization keeps providing these useful, we need to make sure that we give the support in terms of making the central structure of the OSCE more effective. So we give the support to the people who operate on the ground, and that on the basis of mandates that have been given to them collectively by the organization, and they perform and they produce results and they make a difference. We should find a way to realign the ability of or revitalize the ability of the organization to recognize, give support, follow up, and how can I say, make as effective and efficient as possible the results of these activities. So I think we have collected lots of very good suggestions and ideas. We try to compile them, and the next step could be, maybe once we analyze, we think over them a little bit, we can return to these and some other issues, because of course we will touch also on the agenda of the work in other dimensions of the organization. But we will certainly return to this with many of the good ideas that have been put forward, with the objective of seeing what we can do in the short term, first of all, as parliamentarians, to promote initiatives to improve the situation. It's unfortunate that there is a bit of a stalemate in some areas. There is a bit of a crisis, and as I say, we don't want the institutional crisis then turns into an erosion of the values, the commitments that are, the solid foundation of this organization. So this is also the spirit of Helsinki that kicks in, and that should also guide us in our work. So this would be my suggestion. I don't know whether President Sederfeld has any final remarks from her side, but I would like to thank you all for participating in this meeting, and those who contributed for your contributions to the discussion.
Thank you, Ambassador Sanier. No, I have my only final remarks is thank you very much, Ambassador Sanier, for arranging this meeting. Thank you to all the speakers for your speeches here. It have been very interesting, and also thank you to fellow parliamentarians for your activity. And I look forward to the outcome of this events that have been, because I think we get closer and closer to a discussion that we need to have an outcome. We need to do what's called for action, and the human dimension is one important part of this, of course, and we have the security perspective that we always should keep in mind. And I will not take any more time, just thank you. It has been a very interesting and useful afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Margareta. Thank you. Thanks everybody, the panelists in particular. And with Seren Moborn, we will also follow up some of the things that might, how can I say, engage her in her capacity as chair of the Human Dimension Committee, the Parliamentary Assembly. So thanks to all, and have a nice afternoon and evening.
Thank you.